Pete Rose, in my lifetime, as a child, when I was a kid, Pete Rose was this amazing ball player. And no one can take that part away from him. That helped the Phillies win their first ever World Series, a hero in Philadelphia. And then I'm 7 years old when the whole gambling controversy starts up. And then he gets banned from baseball. And that's kind of how I knew Pete Rose for the vast majority of my younger years. This guy that came to the Phillies and helped them win a World Series, and he had a gambling problem, and he got banned because he was betting on baseball. Allegedly, he always said he didn't, but baseball did a whole Dowd report and said that he did. We had a shadow of a doubt bet on baseball. And Pete Rose, no, I never bet on baseball. I didn't bet on baseball. I bet on these other things, but I didn't bet on baseball. And I grew up with, like, the guy said he didn't bet on baseball. Like, let's go here. Like, come on. So I grew up in his camp that he should be in the Hall of Fame. And then in 2004, he writes a book that says, yep, I did it. I bet on baseball, but I never bet against the Reds. Now, Dowd, the guy that did that report that ended up getting him, John Dowd, that ended up getting him out of baseball, right, banning him from baseball, he says that Pete Rose they had no evidence. They had no evidence that he ever bet against the Reds. But he's like, he probably did. that was his takeaway from the whole investigation. Well, I can't prove that he did, but the guy probably did. And looking back on it, when you talk about a moral compass for somebody, yeah, I wouldn't put it past him either. Never bet against the Reds. Okay. All right. While he was managing or playing. Okay. Let's leave it at that. So in 2004, he comes out and he says that he did do it. And I thought to myself, well, that's lousy. I've been supporting this guy this whole time. And it turns out he should have just admitted this back in the day that he bet on baseball. And you know what? He would probably be in the Hall of Fame after the fact. All right. I did. Like, if there was no investigation that was really needed, and he just came out like, yeah, I did it. All right. Like, there have been guys in the past that have been, not banned, but suspended from baseball. Leo DeRocha, for instance, is a guy that was playing craps with players, apparently, and cost one guy a lot of money, and was also consorting with, shady characters. And he ended up getting a 1-year suspension from baseball. And you know what happened after that? He came back, and now he's in the Hall of Fame. So baseball has had a little bit of a forgiveness streak. If you're like, yeah, that happened. Miss Guzzi. Let's move on, right? And Pete Rose never did that. He waited 15 years after the fact. And when he waited 15 years after the fact and it finally came out, you know what he said? Oh, I'm kind of trying to sell a book too. So when you put it out there in your book that you're trying to push, and that's the only reason you're doing it, that's kind of lousy. So from that point on, I was like, you know what, whatever, Pete Rose. If he gets in, he gets in. But I wasn't going to really bang the drum for the guy, anymore at least, and have those arguments about, oh, well, people saying he broke the golden rule of baseball. Get him out of here. To hell with golden rules. It's not for Boy Scouts and choir boys. It's for ball players, And then after that, 2004, I was like, whatever. I don't really care. And I always respected him for the ball player that he was. And then in 2017, the Phillies, by the way, I didn't even mention the whole tax evasion thing, but, in 2017, the Phillies are going to bring him back to honor the 1980 championship team, and Pete Rose is going to be a part of it. Oh, and by the way, Pete Rose, even before in 2004, before that, in 1999, was the All-Century team, was on the baseball field for the first time since the ban. And I supported that because it was giving him credit for a great career, one of the be the best ever, being one of the best ever, the all-time hits leader in Major League Baseball's history. He deserved to be there. Baseball said it was fine. I was cool with that. Thought that was great. 2004, he then finally admits to it. That's where I was at. So then 2017, the Phillies say they're going to bring him back. And I'm like, you know what? Fine. That's the same time. It's not the Hall of Fame, but it'll be the Phillies Wall of Fame, and they're going to honor him and the team. That'll be great. And just so happens around that time, and a lot of people forget this, Pete Rose was suing John Dowd for defamation when Dowd said on a radio interview that Pete Rose would have relationships or sexual relations with underage girls, 14, 15, 16 years old. 16 was the age of consent in Ohio, where Pete Rose was playing at the time. One woman put her story on record, but not her name. She was referred to as Jane Doe. And that was one instance of alleged other instances of Pete Rose having sexual relations with an underage girl. The girl says at the time she was 14 or 15. Pete Rose says she was 16. And this was a relationship that they apparently had With Pete Rose was about 34 years old at the time of this relationship with a alleged 14 or 15 or 16-year-old girl. And this one relationship was supposedly one of at least two that were going on. Because when Dowd talks about it, he talks about girls, plural. This isn't the only instance. At that point in the whole Pete Rose situation, I said to hell with everything. The Phillies cancel it and now bring him back. Like 5 years later, that's still there. That didn't go anywhere. That's still hanging over the guy's head. So we got a guy that didn't want to come clean in Major League Baseball that would have saved his legacy in baseball and the ultimate place that you can save it, the Hall of Fame. Then he comes to his tax evasion. Then this story comes out in his book about how he did bet on baseball 15 years after that. So he's been lying about it the whole time to people like me who are supporting the guy. And then a story comes out with alleged statutory rape. Why are we looking at this guy anymore? And he gets a standing ovation when he comes back. I couldn't believe. I went, you know what? People at the game, and I'm trying to justify a standing ovation. I'm like, you know what? They're applauding baseball and what he did in baseball. And I'm still at the point where if I was at that game, I wouldn't have been standing up and applauding Pete Rose because I don't give a damn about Pete Rose anymore. You talk about the 1980 team, you talk about the big red machine in Cincinnati, and you talk about the guy on the field, incredible. Every single baseball player, you want to have that type of mentality to hustle and bust it down the line every time and get the most hits ever in the history of the game and on base percentage off the charts and all that stuff. Like, yes, that's what you want in a baseball player, that mindset and that talent. But everything else, like, I can't, put my hands together for that for a guy that's lied to me as a baseball fan, lied to you as a baseball fan, spit in the face of his own legacy. And then the whole time from the 70s, there's been this thing hanging over his head about statutory rape we're talking about here. And what the hell are we doing? I have zero respect for Pete Rose. I understand the baseball career, great. But, I'm supposed to do favors for this guy now? I'm supposed to stand and applaud this guy now? Yeah, no thanks. Oh, and the whole time, this case is hanging over his head about relationships with underage girls. And you would think, oh, you know what? Pete Rose, if there's an opportunity for him to say sorry or explain his side of things, he'll take full advantage of that, right? No. He's approaching this scenario like he approached the gambling scenario. No remorse. He's more or less approaching it with a deal with it. That's what you think? Yeah, deal with it. Don't judge me. I'll do what I want to do. I'm Pete Rose. There's no remorse. There's no, I'm sorry. There's an awkward one apparently after it went down yesterday. In case you don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to that, Alex Coffey of the Inquirer was talking to Pete Rose because he was made available to the public, or made available to the press. And she says, I asked Pete Rose what he would say to people who say his presence here sends a negative message to women. This, of course, alluding to the statutory rape case. His response, no, I'm not here to talk about that. Sorry about that. It was 55 years ago, babe. It was 55 years ago, babe. So for the record, he was there to celebrate something that was 42 years ago. All right? And he's not going to talk about something that happened 55 years ago. First off, it wasn't. The case was 5 years ago, and that's what the question is about. Because if that case doesn't come about, and that story doesn't come about in a case that Pete Rose brought up because of defamation, then we're not talking about it. We don't even know about it. But it came up. And instead of just saying, I know a lot of stuff came, instead of having some ounce of humility that might have made people go, you know what, maybe this was, maybe she was 16, maybe this was a long-term relationship that they had. No, he's just, to hell with you. I'm not talking about that. You're being made available to the media. Do you think everyone's just going to kiss you? Pete Rose would like to get 4,000 hits. That's pretty great. No, you're going to get tough questions. I give Alex Coffey, I give her all the credit in the world for asking that question because that question had to be asked. When you weren't invited here, when you were uninvited 5 years ago, because of this reason, and now you're invited back. Well, then I think the question is pretty relevant. So apparently after that went down, Alex Coffey says this, that Rose was made available after the ceremony as well from yesterday. And someone, maybe an agent, said he had something to say to me. Pete Rose had something to say to Alex Coffey, but it didn't seem like he knew he was expected to say anything. He asked if he'd offended me and said, will you forgive me if I sign 1,000 baseballs for you, before saying sorry. So apparently he did apologize, but it didn't really seem sincere is what I gather from all that. I'm willing to go in this camp in terms of the whole babe thing. You can look at it and go, this is a guy in his 80s, different era. I don't know if he meant anything by it, but he should know, bottom line. First off, you never refer to a woman, like, I'll call my wife babe, but like in a professional setting, especially a subject to reporter setting, that person ain't babe. That's at worst a miss. Or that's it. You don't call a woman babe in a professional setting like that. You shouldn't do it at all. Unless that's your pet name for your wife or whatever. That's it. I went and I go, oh, God. Won't answer the question and addresses the woman as babe. Can you show more ignorance in such a short time frame? No. But he did. Because then he goes in the booth during the broadcast and starts doing X-rated material, essentially. Cursed twice. The first, like, I knew we were off to the races once Pete Rose was, I just saw him there and I went, oh dear God, what's happening? And then I saw, like, and they're rolling the alumni in there and they were great. They were telling great stories. Like, I thought, oh boy. I thought Steve Carlton was going to be the best show there. No. Next was Pete Rose. They bring in Pete Rose. And I knew we were going to really be off to the races when, they're like, Tom McCarthy's like, well, you know John Kruk, of course. He was like, I know John Kruk when he had 2 balls. And it's like, and begin. So he references the 1 ball. John Kruk had cancer, for those that didn't know. And he references 1 testicle. And then he goes on to say the S word twice. And then he goes on to explain how a fastball to a certain teammate was at the level of his, I'll say, midsection. Now, to explain it, when I first heard it, I thought he said a cockeyed fastball. And I went, well, that doesn't make any sense. What does that mean? Oh, that's not what he said. And it was like, can we just get him out of here? And then they brought food to him. And I'm like, yes, just keep feeding him so he can't talk. Just eat more. And then he leaves. And it's like, why? Why would we put a microphone in front of this guy? And even if you did, you knew Pete Rose wasn't going to have any type of ounce of remorse, as he's never really shown throughout his entire post-baseball career, not even during his career. I'm done praising Pete Rose, and he should not be in the Hall of Fame. He shouldn't be a part of baseball. There's to me, no positive to it. But the Phillies, you know what they got yesterday? They got a standing ovation. A standing ovation for this guy. I can't do it. I don't like passing judgment. I really don't on people in general. I don't like doing it. I'm looking at it yesterday, and all I can say is that wouldn't have been me. And from people I've talked to, people I've seen on social media, I know I'm not alone in that. And I know some people had his poster on their wall as kids, and they looked up to him. And they'll never forget what he did for that team in 1980 to bring the first World Series. And I get all that, and all that's fine. But like, there comes a point, as it came for me, to look at Pete Rose and go, yeah, hell of a baseball player, but I'm not doing any favors for this guy. I came to that conclusion in 2004 when he admitted to lying about baseball, gambling on baseball this whole time. And I certainly came to that point even harder in 2017 when the story came out about statutory rape. I'm out. And still the same guy with no remorse? Yeah, no thanks. And when it comes to that whole Hall of Fame thing, my argument has grown to this. When people say he's the all-time hits leader, he should be in the Hall of Fame, which was my own argument for a long time, just like many other people. He should be in the Hall of Fame. It's come down to this for me. The all-time hits leader should be in the Hall of Fame. You can't say that sentence and be wrong. But it's a shame that the all-time hits leader is Pete Rose, who deserves no accolades, no celebration ever again in baseball. We know what he did during his career. Congratulations. It was great. The guy that he has been since then doesn't deserve that. Even the baseball people, how do you support it when he's spit in your face? And he gambled on the game. He broke the one golden rule, and I was willing to forgive him for that. But he said he didn't do it. You know what? Benefit of the doubt. Didn't do it. And then 2014 totally admitted to it. Like, I was supporting you this whole time. And then you find out he's even just like to say the word creep. I hate getting in wars with adjectives about, no, he's a creep. No, he's despicable. No, he's whatever. The creepiest guy you can imagine in that booth. I have no need for it anymore. And I didn't need to see him.